Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 497 for the 29th of April 2018. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia, and we had another vote, and we voted for some cooler weather to come, and it sort of did. Looking outside the window, you don't look at it looks cooler outside. It is cooler outside. It's a very nice day. And what a nice day I had, folks, with my friends Lara and Trish from the Skeptics Committee. We spent a few hours today working on the prediction project, marking the homework of psychics. There are hundreds to get through, but we had an interesting day marking predictions. I think by the end of this, we're all going to know a lot about Nicole Kidman somehow. Coming up on this week's show, what a treat, what an interesting interview I have for you. A few days ago, I visited Bob Connolly, an award-winning Australian filmmaker who in 1980 was the director of the very famous documentary James Randi in Australia, the classic of all classic water divining tests. Now, nobody knew at the time how important this documentary, this filming, would become for the skeptical movement. It's credited with helping to kick off the Australian skeptics. But even today, it is a wonderful lesson in not only how to construct water divining, but also the psychology of the water diviners and good old basic skepticism, spoon bending as well, told by James Randi. Bob Connolly will tell us his recollections of filming James Randi in Australia and some interesting stories to tell about his experiences being a filmmaker. I'm sure, like me, you will really enjoy this extended interview with filmmaker Bob Connolly. Following that, we have a plea, a shout-out for help from Skeptic Zone listeners who know their IT, know their web skills. And if you have skills in capturing and making copies of web pages, the skeptical movement in Australia would like to hear from you. More details coming up a bit later on in the show. Then to round off the show, it's the diet skeptic, Mandy-Lee Noble. She's going to be talking about Kefir. I have never heard of Kefir before. It's all to do with probiotics and gut health and bacteria and microbes and all that sort of interesting stuff, and the health claims made for this drink called Kefir. I think we'll all learn something this week with the Diet Skeptic. A message for Sydney-siders. We have Skeptics in the pub this Thursday evening from 6 o'clock at the Occidental Hotel at Wynyard, just near Wynyard Station. I'll put a link to the show notes. You can find out more via Meetup. But this week, we have a talk on the life and works of Stephen Hawking by our very own rocket scientist, Ian Bryce. That should be a very interesting evening. And if you're in Sydney, I hope to see you there at Skeptics in the Pub. And if you are there, come up and say hello. Who knows, you might end up on the Skeptic Zone. But now it's time for me to run downstairs and have a cup of Kefir. I think. Actually, I'll hold off on that until I hear Mandy-Lee's Noble's report on the subject. I might run downstairs and have a glass of water. Maybe after the show I might have a glass of Kefir. We'll find out. Well, I make up my mind and do that. I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. I'm speaking to film director Bob Connolly. Hello, Bob.
Hi.
Great to catch up with you. Now, folks, Bob is the man who directed, is that the right term, the original water divining documentary called James Randi in Australia way back in 1980. But before we get to that, Bob, what is your background?
Oh, I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've been one for the last 40-odd years, I suppose. I started at the ABC. I trained as a journalist at the ABC as a cadet, and after a stint of as a foreign correspondent in New York, and I began a career as an independent documentary filmmaker.
So how then did you go from that to doing this documentary?
Well, I had been working at the ABC for about 14 years, and I basically met up with Robin Anderson, who became my life partner and professional working partner. We made documentaries for a quarter of a century together, but she said to me at that point, she had just come from New York where she'd just done a master's in sociology at Columbia, and she said, "You've been at the ABC too long, so it's time you left." And I was, in love with the fortnightly paycheck, and she said, "Well, if you don't go, I will." So I ideally didn't want that to happen, so we became independent filmmakers, and I'd met Dick while I was at the ABC doing a film I did a feature documentary about Antarctica, about the Antarctic Treaty. And Dick had started up these aerial flights over Antarctica with Qantas. And I rang him up and I said, "Look, we're doing this documentary about the Antarctic Treaty, which is due in whenever it was, 10 or 15 years' time. And would you mind if we sort of set the doco in the plane going down to the Antarctic, and we could use it as a springboard to talk about the various political and, economic issues and so on?" He said, "Yeah, okay." And he said, "How many of you will there be?" And I said, 5. And he said, "You can have 2." And that was my first lesson in independent filmmaking from Dick Smith. And I learned a lot more from him too. So anyway, we liked each other, as a result of... And then when I quit the ABC, he somehow heard about it. And he rang up and said, "How about we make some films together?" And I've got this one coming up. I'm a member of the Skeptics. And I want to make this film. There's me and Richard Carlton and I think Philip Adams was involved at that stage. So, of course, I jumped at it. The more I sort of went into it, and then I met James Randi, who was just an electrifying character, absolutely electrifying. We just began. I mean, with a minimal crew, with not a great deal of preparation, because we didn't have to do much. I mean, Randi was astonishingly able, and he'd done it many times before. He knew exactly what the situation was. He predicted everything that was going to happen, right down to their stubborn refusal. This is the water diviners, even in the face of incontrovertible evidence, which of a diabolical form. In other words, to talk about a double entrapment. And so we shot the film over, I think, 3 or 4 days or something.
So in the documentary, it starts with a shot of a Qantas plane flying over Sydney, which I imagine was stock footage.
Yeah, it would have been.
Yeah, it would have been. And we hear Randy's voice, and then it switches to like a mini press conference, and I imagine that would have been at the airport or in a hotel room or something like that. Do you recall?
I don't. And look, I should have had another look at the film, which I haven't done, and not since Dick gave me a copy about, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah. One of them surfaced thanks to you, apparently.
Yeah. And we see Randy doing a press conference. He's talking about, and he brings out the cheque.
Yep.
He says, "This tired cheque has been in this wallet," or something like that.
Yep. And I don't expect ever to spend it or something. I think he says. Yeah.
Now you've got $10,000, and there are 2 Australian businessmen who've each got $10,000. That's $30,000 for anyone who can successfully demonstrate the paranormal. How confident are you of keeping your money?
Well, let me see now. I'll show you the check. I've carried this check around now. This one has only been carried since June 25th, 1980. I have to renew it every now and then. I don't know about your banks, but every 6 months a check like this goes dead. You see, it's no longer valid. For 15 years, this is the 15th year, I've carried a check around like this in this tired little old wallet. That check for $10,000, I've never had to give up 5 cents of it so far. That doesn't mean that I won't. It doesn't mean that I'm not willing. I can lose $10,000, but I would gladly surrender that $10,000 if I were given evidence of one paranormal ability of any kind, because it would open my universe much larger than it is. It's a wonderful universe I live in. I enjoy life from day to day. I have my ups and downs like everyone else, but I think it is a wonderful world that we live in. I don't need miracles of a semi-religious nature, as they put it, in order to make my world any better. But to be offered something like that, to know that a person could float in the air, could find concealed water underground, could bend a spoon by merely thinking about it, that would make my universe 100 times bigger than it is, and all the more marvelous. It would be worth $10,000.
Yeah. So he arrives, and he's being looked after by Dick Smith, as far as Dick Smith tells me, and then it was a matter of, were you involved in any way of of selecting the location, or that had already been done?
No, that had all been done.
Right.
Yeah, that had all been done. And it had to be a very particular sort of location, obviously, where there was no possibility that the water table was up high. You know, in this sort of film work, you don't direct things, you capture them. You know, that's the whole philosophy of it.
Of course.
So what I do is wait for things to happen, and hopefully be on hand when they do happen. Yeah.
And so you had a couple of days, the water diviners turn up. Mm-hmm. Did you have much interaction with those people, or were you just following them around?
Oh, no, we talked to them, and they were a charming bunch of people. They were supremely confident. You know, they came up to me and basically... I remember them having arguments about, you know, because they thought they would all pass the test, all of them were convinced that they would pass the test. And they had a bit of an argument about how they should divide up the money once it was awarded, and who should get it, because they all thought they would. Yeah. And they decided they would basically split it. But I mean, they are seemingly normal, everyday sort of people, and I guess part of the reason for that is that they'd had their prejudice, or at least their beliefs, reinforced constantly for a lifetime, because that's what most of them did for a living. Yeah. They were water diviners, and they found water. Yeah. And the farmers thanked them for it. And I had some farmer friends, Jack and Charles Francis out at Gabothery, out of Forbes, and I remember talking to them about these water diviners. He said, "Oh yeah, of course, they found some water for us too." Mm. You know, and I remember at the time I didn't think much of that, but and I'm not a member, and I wasn't a member of Skeptics. I was a filmmaker, and I kept a deliberate and neutral attitude about the whole thing. I wasn't going to go in there with my mind made up about the whole process. That wasn't really my job. My job was to capture what happened as accurately and as honestly as possible. And I told them that too. I said that's my ground rule on the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And it was a revelation for me. I mean, I sort of watched it with increasing disbelief. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's not hard to sort of shift your ground fairly early when you're dealing with someone like James Randi, who was a genius. I mean, there's just no question. He had a lightning mind. Yeah. A lightning mind, incredibly smart guy, but driven by what I remember was, you know, and he did his best to hide it, but deep down there was almost a sort of an incandescent rage there about it. You know, it was his life's mission to explode all this stuff because he thought people were being duped. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Although, from your point of view, and I think it's reflected in the documentary, the test itself was very fair. I mean, if somebody there had the ability, they would have passed the test. Well, it was very fair because Randi didn't need to be duplicitous. Yeah. I mean, he had done it before. I mean, it would have been an appalling error of judgment to have bodged it up in any kind of way. It was very fair. It was deliberately designed to be fair. And the thing I found fascinating about it, it was deliberately designed to basically make it impossible for people, other than being delusional, to weasel out of the outcome. And he was absolutely clear about it. You have the highest you will get is almost certainly 1 out of 10 in terms of your ability to read which of these pipes has got the water in it. You know, that will be the result. If it's pure chance, it's 1 out of 10. And I think it was very close to 1 out of 10. Yeah, I think in the end... higher, just fractionally higher, because they also did not only water, they had gold. They buried some gold, and I think they buried some jewels or money, or something like that. Yeah. That was sort of the sideshow, you know, while they were waiting for the adjudicators, you know, supervised by the Church of England minister. Oh, Reverend Ted Noffs. Ted Noffs, yes, to give it just to make sure, you know, to make us all honest. I thought that was a nice touch, actually. So while all that was happening, they all said, "Well, now we are going to bury some money now, and can you all divine money?" "Yeah, we can divine anything you tell us." And so off they went like lemmings, you know. And of course went over the hill again. It was extraordinary. Yeah, amazing. It was a lot of fun to do.
It's something that, having done lots of tests since then, and that's always been my inspiration. It's if I could have a time machine, I'd love to go back and see what it was like on the day. Yeah. And what was so James Randi was obviously running around making sure everything was ticking over. What was Dick doing all this time, Dick Smith?
Backing him up and chortling away and talking to the press and having a great deal of fun, which is what he always does.
Yeah.
I mean, he's like a big kid, you know, he's, with extremely expensive toys.
I've had a ride in his expensive toy, the helicopter once, yes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we did about 3 films together with the helicopter as the basis of it, and it was an extraordinary experience. Yeah, I mean, but of course, underneath that is a man of very considerable intellect and an extraordinary sort of innovative judgment. You know, you don't get to be where Dick Smith is without a lot of innate qualities of a certain sort. But part of that was his just almost schoolboyish enthusiasm for life.
Yeah.
You know, he's the antithesis of the sort of the millionaire who buries himself away in Bellevue Hill, and you know, he despises people like that too, in a way. You know, he uses his money in a very whimsical way, but almost always in the pursuit of knowledge or related areas. You know, that's the thing he's on now about overpopulation.
Yeah.
You know,
well, that's his track record and all the adventures he does too.
Yeah.
So yes, Dick Smith on the at Ryde. It wasn't. It was a field at Ryde.
Yeah, it was Ryde. Yeah. Top Ryde.
He was running
on
around
top of the hill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. In the documentary, the voiceover says, in a field on the outskirts of Sydney.
Which it was then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On Sydney's outskirts, a team of workmen begin preparing the site for Australia's first definitive test of water divining. The test has been designed with the complete agreement of the water diviners themselves. 10 parallel trenches are dug to take 10 plastic water pipes. The diviners will have to detect in which pipe the water is flowing.
Yeah. Now what the pipes, 1 metre apart? Where's the tail one going to go?
Probably about 20 feet down.
Right, and that's going to be left open, and can we get little holes in the top of the pipes?
So I can, yeah, I'll put valve boxes on all of these.
Right,
valves.
but if we just have little holes in the top of the pipe to know that there is water flowing, you know,
just to
so
prove
someone can see
so that anyone who looks at it can tell there is water flowing in that pipe.
Right, now, have you got, what are you going to use, a bin here? Let's have a look here.
Where's the valve box?
See, is that okay for you?
Oh, that's now water flowing through a pipe like this.
Oh, and there's a box.
Such a volume.
What a beautiful job you've done.
Very good.
Hold on.
This valve box will go. Each valve will be in the ground.
Yes.
Oh, very good. That's excellent.
Perfect.
Oh, very good.
Just hold on. That mounts like there. Mm-hmm. And that'll just go over the top of it.
Lovely.
Goes over there.
Lovely.
We're not going to bury this until tomorrow, are we?
No. We want them to see that it is a legitimate setup, that the pipes are in the ground. They must understand every fact about this thing. Up until the last moment, they will not understand in which pipe the water is flowing. Right. In fact, I won't know it because someone else is going to turn it on.
Yep. And then we'll bury it after they've seen it today.
No, we don't want to bury it until tomorrow.
We bury it moments before.
Oh.
So they're absolutely sure that nothing took place overnight. They're going to suspect, because the powers, I think, will not work, they're going to suspect some chicanery. We've got to show them every detail of it. They must be absolutely assured in their own minds that the test is being done fairly.
And then they each do a divining test over the area beforehand to check that there's no water that's going to worry them.
Well, they've got to say where it is. And if they say that it's near pipe number 6 or something, then we say, okay, we will not use 6. Then their chances are 1 out of 9. We hope we won't have to do that.
You're doing all this work. Do you believe in water divining?
Yeah.
There's 10 pipes there, right?
Yes.
And they'll put water in one of those pipes.
Yes.
And you've got to find out which one it is.
Yes, and then they'll drain that pipe, and then they'll put it in another pipe, and they've got to check the water in whichever other pipe it will be in.
They've gone to quite some deal of effort and work to try and make it fair for all concerned, and I think we'll find that, in fact, I'm sure there'll be a result, and possibly 10 results tomorrow, the way things are looking.
You think the 10 diviners will be able to get it right?
I'll be very surprised if the 10 of them do not.
Yeah.
And of course, it's all now commercial buildings and everything. The field's long gone.
Yeah, it was 40 years ago. That's amazing. I mean, it's terrifying. Terrifying.
It's funny. I mean, how the time. Well, it's just normal human experience, isn't it? Time flies like that. So you do the tests over. Was it just One day, wasn't it? One day. And all the diviners were there running around and everything. Because there are shots of earlier on when we're just meeting the diviners, and folks, I'll certainly link to the video in the show notes so you can enjoy it. We have a long shot of diviners all walking around a field. I don't know if you recall doing cutaways like that.
Inspecting it?
No, there's a field, not the field, but like a park, and they're all running around with their divining sticks, and there's funny music, and all this sort of stuff going on.
Yeah.
Now, how much, after the filming was done, how much input did you have in the editing process?
Oh, I edited the film.
You were the editor too, right?
Well, we had an editor, someone it was 16mm film back then, of course, not tape. And so I just, as usual, supervised the editing.
I see, of course, yeah.
We had a professional editor. And it was, I think we put it together in about 10 days, something like that.
So, yeah, all the original footage you would have shot. I wonder where that could be. Any idea?
Look, it's like marble chips. That's how filmmakers view it. It's like when you're shaping the statue and they're the marble chips, all the rushes. But that was, as I say, it was reversal film that would have been thrown out after a period of time.
I imagine so, and all the bits that didn't make
because if I remember, we shot a sequence with Philip Adams with his, because Randi also went for these faith medical people as well.
Psychic surgeons.
Yeah, so, and Philip agreed very reluctantly to lie on a table and have his shirt pulled up, and of course James said, I will now take the poisons out of your... And this was particularly interesting to me because... Now, it's too long ago to remember now, but it was either before this or after it. And I'm almost certain it was after it. Let me explain what he did. He basically, he put we were filming it, and he put his finger... he bent a few spoons, right, before this, which had the camera... The sound recordist was very sceptical, because he actually believed in all this sort of stuff from memory. And so he was one guy who needed to be convinced. And also of the water diviner. He wasn't at all, because he'd had some experience with it out in the bush or something like that. So this guy was definitely not a card-carrying skeptic of any sort, and he gradually had his beliefs demolished as we went on. And I remember with the spoon, and just as a matter of a throwaway, while we were preparing to film his operation on Philip Adams, while they were prepping him, for the operation. He just he started playing with the sound recorders. He said, now, I want you to rub the spoon straight, the whole rigmarole he'd go through. And then, of course, he gets the spoon, breaks it. So, oh, my God,
That's in the documentary.
Is it?
That sequence, okay. Because it's a wonderful sequence.
Well, here's the spoon anyway that was bent by Ori, the Melbourne boy, several years ago. Can you tell me that was trickery, even though I filmed it?
No, I can't, because I wasn't there. All I can say is it's more probable that it is trickery than that it is a supernatural occurrence, because you admit that the conditions were not scientific and they were not complete whatsoever.
No, the conditions weren't scientific, but it appeared as though he bent the spoon.
It appeared as if he did, yes.
All right, well, how would that be done? How would that sort of trickery or sleight of hand be done?
Would you take this spoon and hold it between your fingers like this in front of me, like that? Mm-hmm. Put your elbows on the table. Yeah. So let's present it so that it is thoroughly visible. Now, you're holding it firmly. Pinch it like that so that you have good control over it. Yes. Fine. Turn it just a little bit sideways, a little bit like that. That's fine. Now, I'm really going to stroke it with my index finger. I'm not putting undue pressure on. If I put pressure on it like that, I would move your arms, right?
Right.
I'm not putting undue pressure on. You're going to get a remarkable illusion taking place here. You will think, if you aren't very careful, you will begin to think that it looks rubbery. Am I correct?
Yes.
Now, I'm putting very little. Hold it very, very lightly. Very, very lightly. So you're barely holding it. Look at this. It appears as if it's getting rubbery. Let go of it for a second, if you will. Now, I'm just going to hold it like this, and I'm just going to... Heavens to gimbals, is there no end to the man's covered? I did it rather well, I think.
Well, I think you did it very well, but how did you do it?
If I were to tell you that, you'd be as smart as I am. And I don't want you to be quite as smart as I am, because then you wouldn't sleep well at night.
Come on.
Now, you say this is the one that Ori bent.
Yeah.
Look, just by stroking it gently at that, it bent. Isn't that fantastic?
That's amazing.
And so Randi does the spoon thing, and like this, and there's a cutaway to Dick Smith standing next to a cameraman in fits, and the cameraman's telling Dick to be quiet.
Yeah, okay. And then I think we filmed the Philip Adams operation, but maybe Philip didn't want to be in it, or
well, maybe because the only time Philip is in the final, Philip Adams is in the final cut is right at the end.
Okay. So
where Randy's doing a trick with a cigarette on the table.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So the whole psychic surgeon bit didn't make the final cut.
Well, I thought it was the best bit. And I don't know why it got cut out. I know Philip probably didn't want it. I mean, because you saw his extremely capacious midriff, and maybe he was a bit, because he always wears all black. So that's a deadly telltale sign of self-consciousness. But it was astounding because I remember watching, as he said, now I'm going to take all these terrible things that are in your stomach, all these wicked tumours and things that have been making you feel ill. So he gets his fingers and he starts pushing, and he pushes deeper and deeper into this capacious roll of Philip fat, and then this blood wells up. And it's the most extraordinary sight. I mean, you could swear blind that he is actually he's penetrated his stomach.
Yeah.
And then the blood wells up, and then he goes, it's coming, I can get it now. And as the blood wells, and he just pulls out this giblet and says, I've got it.
Yeah.
And we were gobsmacked, absolutely gobsmacked. And we said, how do you do it? Come on, how do you do it? And he showed us, basically. And I don't know if I should give that away, should I? Or
I think if listeners really want to know, they can find out.
Okay, yeah. But it's
sleight of hand.
It's sleight of it's sort of sleight of hand. Yeah, it is sleight of hand, but it's very well prepared sleight of hand. Yeah.
There's a certain prop that we all know.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was just absolutely extraordinary. But the point I was going to make was that my mother, who was a dear soul, was very much into all this stuff, Ouija boards and, visiting of the hereafter. And she used to go across this place in England. I mean, it was her one blind spot, an otherwise highly intelligent, not particularly well-educated woman. But she believed in all this sort of stuff. And she finally got a bit ill at one point, and she started going to this faith healer guy in King's Cross. No, a woman, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
And she went to him a couple, and she told me breathlessly about this wonderful woman and how she was, could operate on her tongue. Identical thing that Randi did with Philip.
Yeah.
And I said, can I come along? And she said, okay. So I went along, you see, and we went into the room, and here's this woman, all not quite dressed up in bangles and veils and and there wasn't a crystal ball or anything like that, but it was like a sort of semi-clinical environment. And basically she sort of said, who's he? And I said, I'm just very curious to see how you actually operate and do this. And she said, no, I can't do it in the presence of others. So I wasn't allowed to watch. I was sent out the door, but I really went to town on my mum after that, and she stopped going to her as it happened. But, I mean, that was an object lesson for me.
Well, there are two things that when I'm giving public talks and whatever, I say there are two things that, for sure, I mean, there are many, but the two things for sure that we know if they're being done as a scam and a con.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of people who call themselves psychics out there who've convinced themselves they have magical powers.
Yeah.
A lot of people are very honestly deluded, but there are two things for sure we know you can't be deluded. You have to learn. One is spoon bending, because you have to learn the trick, and the other is psychic surgery, because, as you know, it's a sleight of hand, it's a con from beginning to end, so you can't innocently fool yourself you're doing this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I mean, that was Randi's whole thing. I'm a magician. I'm a magician, and the problem with people like Uri Geller and all these sort of people is that when they're subjected to tests, their interlocutors are scientists. But scientists are not trained magicians. Magicians. And so it takes a magician to expose a magician.
Yeah.
The curious thing is that many years later in when I think about it, it was before. It was 1975. I had done a film for the ABC at an Aboriginal settlement in Central Australia called Yuendamu. And while we were there, we were filming these three old men out about 10 kilometres out from the settlement in late evening one day, and they were doing a sand painting thing for us, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which was open to the public. We could film it, in other words. And one of them suddenly cried out and cut himself with a knife across the shoulder and asked if they take them straight away back into the settlement. Now, we were, as I said, 10 kilometres away, and there was very little wood there, so it was right out in the open. There was no way they could have got any signal or anything like that. And when we got into the settlement, it was dark, as we'd gone out in a tractor with a trailer. There was a huge crowd around this little aid post, right? And I went in to see the nurse that was on duty there, and I said, "What's happening?" And she said, "Oh, there's a man died." Now, the reason I found that interesting is that just before this guy cut himself, I had looked at my watch because I was very worried about the colour temperature because we were losing light. And I noticed it was 5:30. And I asked the nurse, "What time did he die?" And she said, "Just a minute, I'll go and check." And it was like 5:28 or something like that, time of death. So, that really shook me up a bit. And then, for the next 10 days, there was this elaborate sorry spectacle where they, found out why the man had died in the hospital, and who the guy was who'd cut himself. There was a complex clan relationship, and it all had to do with singing and all this sort of stuff. And what intrigued me was not how did this old man know that? What signal did he get? So I began reading. But 3 or 4 years ago, I began writing a memoir, and I was writing up this chapter because I was very curious to know, just how this could have happened and what the current thinking about it was. And it turns out that A.P. Elkin, the famous Australian anthropologist, had actually, seen remarkable examples of this sort of thing in practice. In other words, or sort of telemetry almost, this of information being sent over a long distance. And he was very intrigued, initially sceptical, but more and more intrigued about what it was. And he began doing a series of experiments, which were all inconclusive because nobody could agree on the methodology for the experiments. But I still managed to find a working professional anthropologist in Adelaide who was an advisor to the South Australian government on land rights claims, who said to me, "I have no scepticism about that whatsoever. I am convinced from my 30 years of working with Aboriginal people that they have extra mental powers when it comes to hearing and speaking to people." Now, I then asked my friend across the road, who was the emeritus professor of anthropology at Sydney University, and she basically said, "I don't believe it," because when I used to go out and work with the people in Hermannsburg, I saw equally extraordinary things, but I'm sure it was just due to an astonishing acuity of hearing, or whatever. And I finished the chapter by citing the example of these elephants in Africa who can hear, they'll suddenly lift up and point in a particular direction and then head off there. And what they're hearing is thunder from up to 100 kilometres away. And it's a low-frequency sound, and they have ears that can pick up a low-frequency sound from 100 kilometres away. So in other words, there's a natural explanation for all these sorts of things.
Well, we would suspect so, though sometimes it's not always apparent or easy to find.
No, not at all.
Not at all. And if we were sort of to relate this back to the water diviners, of course, in their worldview, the answer is quite easy. They have special powers which lets them find water. And as you saw, when they don't, their minds will race to find out or give them comfort. I didn't find it, because my foot was sore or something.
It's a very common human response, obviously. When you are, when it's been the law has been passed down to you by your father and grandfather and so on, because it must be an ancient ritual, I'd imagine.
It goes back. Water divining, dowsing, this sort of thing, thousands of years.
Well, okay, so there is thousands of years of basically of people having their beliefs reinforced by discovery, of course, because so often these people do find water. If they didn't find water, they discover the water table, of course, but I mean, and they also are probably, and I remember Randi saying this, they're very good, almost certainly very good geographers, these people. They know landform. You know, they would say, you know, we would say skeptically, well, I'm telling you how to suck eggs, you know, they use this as part of their bag of tricks. They wouldn't see it that way at all, I imagine. No. They would just subconsciously employ these bits of evidence to make a decision about where to go.
Well, there's many factors. One is, as you saw, rods move. They twitch, they move, they swing. Yeah. And we know why, because of the ideomotor action and the muscle movement. Yeah. Coupled with success, and coupled with the old standard of remembering the times they were right and disregarding or excusing the times they were wrong. And the power of belief. Yeah. You know, that's obviously at the bottom of the whole thing. Yeah. So 40, almost coming up to 40 years, is 38 years ago that the James Randi in Australia was made. And as we quite like to say in the Australian Skeptics, it was one of the reasons that the organisation was kicked off, this meeting, this divining. And I talk about James Randi in Australia, the documentary, because not only, and we were discussing this before off air, not only is it a classic of skepticism, it's got Randi in it, which is always fun, but you could film the same thing tomorrow. And it would be scarcely any different. You'd get the same characters from the countryside rolling up with their wonderful devices and things. You'd get the same confidence, and you'd get the same results, almost certainly. Because I've been involved with a couple of since, you know, in the years since then, and the same. And that struck me at the time. The first time I was involved in a water divining test, along came the diviners from Central Casting. They're a wonderful group, aren't they? It's amazing that they still persist, though, in a way, because when you think of the 40 years that have gone by and the explosion of geometric proportions of knowledge and the mechanical and electronic devices to utilise that knowledge, that they haven't in a way been subsumed by just electronic devices that can tell where water is and so on, and so therefore you don't have to have this sort of human element to it. It's interesting. It's not going to go away. No. And perhaps in a way it shouldn't. No, maybe there's just we all have a soft spot for this, this group of people who are probably keeping us a bit more human, or something or other. Maybe there are some sort of superstitions that we should hang on to. Otherwise, we're just going to be, we're going to grow, antenna out our ears or something. Well, they are one of the, in some ways, they are quite wonderful, and they're usually, with a very rare exception, honest, genuine people. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was struck by that at the time, just the level of their self-belief and the gentleness. They were really quite concerned about how embarrassed we were all going to be. When they all managed to do it. Yeah. I mean, it was just extraordinary. Not one of them, had the prescience to basically see what a diabolically cunning experiment this was. Because I remember, and of course from the film, they say, right, make sure you can't divine water when the field was clear, and then they dig the trench, okay, and then they put the pipe on the trench, then the open pipe with the water, yes, then they close the pipe with the water in it, yes, because they know the water's in there, because they've seen it, it's been shown to them. And then suddenly they're confronted with the 10 pipes and only one's got the water in it. And you notice with all of them, suddenly their, what's the word? I was going to say antenna go up. But no, I mean, they certainly do become more serious and a little bit more tentative about the whole thing, because they just do. That's the situation they're in, nothing happens. They don't do it. Anyway, folks, the documentary is called James Randi in Australia, and it's one of the jokes that we've always had is what an imaginative title it was. Yeah. Oh well, I mean. It played on his name, and at that stage he was a world-famous figure. Yeah, absolutely. The man who unmasked Uri Geller. Yeah. And of course, it was only less than a month after that he flew down to Melbourne to be on the Don Lane show and was spectacularly kicked off. That's right. Yeah.
With me, but you've come here. You're offering $5,000 to people that say people are fakes. You said Doris Stokes is a fake. No, I never said you say Uri Geller's a fake. No. You came here and you're giving everybody a lot of lip service, and you haven't done anything except show us a lot of tricks that you learned out of your two-bit act that you're not working in. I never said that Uri Geller was a fake. You come over here with this big reputation. You give us a lot of lip service about all this stuff that you're going to prove. You go against a lady like Doris Stokes who never harmed anybody in her whole life, and you call her a charlatan and a fake.
You know a great deal about it.
Yes, I do. You said that she was a liar on the radio. You called her a liar.
No.
And that woman wouldn't lie to anybody. And I don't know whether she's right or wrong, but she wouldn't lie to anybody. We're going for a commercial break, and you can piss off. We'll be back with Diana Trout.
Which Randy would have loved.
Oh, well, Dick Smith loves it because suddenly, when Randy flew back to Sydney and Dick went to the Sydney airport to pick Randy up, there are all these reporters, and Dick thought, great, he was giggling. You know?
Yeah, Dick always knew the value of publicity, good and bad. Yeah.
Well, Bob Connolly, what a pleasure it has been to chat with you. And again, if I had a time machine, I'd love to have looked at that day and seen what it was like to be there. But we can all be there by watching James Randi in Australia. Folks, again, I'll put the link on this week's show notes. But for now, Bob, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Putting out a call for help from the Skeptic Zone listeners. We have learnt that the Australian government will soon be taking down a website that holds a lot of useful information to skeptics and to the members of Friends of Science in Medicine. These pages are the complaints and determinations about shonky therapeutics goods. About 2,000 of them. The Therapeutics Goods Administration will soon be taking this information down due to restructuring. If you have the skills to automate the copy of and backup of web pages, a large number of web pages, we'd be really keen to hear from you. I know there are many listeners with IT skills. For this project, it doesn't matter where you live in the world. If you're able to help with this project, you'd be working with longtime friend of the show, Dr. Ken Harvey. As a thank you, you'd be given acknowledgement on any scientific papers that arise as a result of the project. If you have some spare time and the skills in automated copying of web pages, please get in contact. Send an email to fsmcomplaints@gmail.com. That's FSM, stands for Friends, Science and Medicine, complaints@gmail.com. SFM Complaints is one word. And put in the subject line, backup of web pages. This is your chance, if you have the right sort of IT skills, to be of real use to the skeptical movement. Thank you. That looks good enough to eat. Or does it? Here's the diet skeptic, Mandy-Lee Noble.
Hello, Skeptic Zone listeners. Mandy-Lee Noble here, dietitian and skeptic, reporting from Brisbane. For this episode of the Diet Skeptic Report, I thought I would take a toe dip into a topic that the media cannot seem to get enough of, our microbiota. The human microbiota is the 10 to 100 trillion symbiotic microbial cells harboured in each person, primarily bacteria in the gut. More specifically, I want to talk about Kefir, a fermented drink that is labelled as a probiotic and claimed to have a large range of health benefits owing to the possible positive contribution of its symbiotic microbes to our microbiota. Due to its growing popularity among health seekers and natural health enthusiasts, kefir has grown from being a traditional homemade food enjoyed mostly by Eastern European cultures to being sold as commercial products in major food retailers. Kefir is reported to have originated from the Caucasus Mountains, which extend as a barrier between Eastern Europe and Western Asia. Kefir is a fermented drink, traditionally made using cow's milk or goat's milk. It tastes sour and acidic, and it can be effervescent and slightly alcoholic depending on the culture used to prepare it. It is made using kefir grains, which is the term used to describe the culture of yeast and lactic acid bacteria that is more like cauliflower in appearance. The bacteria convert the lactose to lactic acid, decreasing the milk's pH, and the yeast produces ethanol and carbon dioxide from the lactic acid. Homemade kefir can usually be produced in around 24 hours in a process similar to making yogurt. The kefir grains are strained from the mixture and can be perpetually used again to make more kefir. Kefir can also be made using water or coconut milk or even coconut water, provided there is sufficient sugar in the mixture to feed the fermentation process. So to answer the question of whether there is any health benefits to consuming kefir, I will start with the current evidence regarding the health benefits of probiotics. A probiotic is defined as live microorganisms which, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit on the host. So by definition, a food that is labelled as a probiotic has an implied health benefit. However, benefits from probiotics in healthy people is currently not supported by the research. A recent Cochrane review of 16 systematic reviews found little scientific evidence and no high-quality scientific evidence for the use of probiotics as a preventative measure, while only a small number of strain-specific clinical applications for probiotics are evidence-based. To date, the European Food and Safety Authority has not approved any health label claims for probiotics, and some European countries will not allow the word probiotic to be used on food labels. In Australia, the term probiotic is also considered to be a health claim and should accurately reflect the underlying scientific evidence in adherence to Australian food regulatory standards. So, what are the health claims made about kefir? Commercially prepared kefir drinks in Australia appear to be labelled with meaningless wellness claims, such as friendly live cultures and maintains your body's inner balance naturally. However, wellness blogs are full of much more specific health claims. I'm just going to name a few, with the caveat that the real list is very long, but these are rabbit holes that I'm trying to avoid in the interest of having a story completed on time. Anyway, some of the benefits of kefir I was able to find with just a cursory glance at the interwebs included antibacterial properties, protection against cancer, lowering of blood pressure and blood glucose levels, treatment of inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome and lactose intolerance, as well as improvements of the symptoms of allergies and asthma. Kefir is also a food promoted by the otherwise extremely restrictive GAPS diet, a non-evidence-based dietary treatment for symptoms associated with autism spectrum disorder. In my search to find proven health benefits from the consumption of kefir in humans, I found very little evidence. A search of PubMed for randomised controlled trials to test the benefits for kefir found a very small number of individual studies. Only one study reported a difference between the group that consumed Kefir and the control group. This was in a long-term measurement of blood glucose levels or HbA1c levels for a small group of diabetics. However, much caution should be applied in interpreting these results due to the study design, the duration of the study, and the small number of participants. Also, a single study can only suggest a possible benefit to that particular Kefir culture and does not constitute evidence of benefit to all diabetics from Kefir in general. I've also observed some wellness bloggers claiming that Kefir reduces the risk of osteoporosis due to the calcium in the milk used to produce the Kefir. I think I'll give them this one. Are there any risks to consuming Kefir? Some Kefir recipes stipulate the use of raw milk. This would present a risk of foodborne illness, particularly to infants and children, the elderly, and those who are immunocompromised. The claim that Kefir will not ferment in pasteurised milk is false. So to sum it up, it seems that Kefir is a traditional beverage that has been enjoyed by many cultures for a long time, and for those who enjoy it, I would encourage them to doing so. But for those who do not enjoy the taste of Kefir, or for whom making Kefir is a burden, or to whom purchasing Kefir products is a significant expense, there is no evidence of health benefits beyond those of the nutritional ingredients used to produce the Kefir. So until next time, Skeptics, this has been the Diet Skeptic Report. Thank you for listening.
Skeptical 2018. Conference registration is now open. Registration for Skeptical 2018 conference, the 9th Northern California gathering on science and skepticism, is now open. Skeptical is excited to bring a stellar list of speakers on timely and important topics to you this June. This year's event will be held at the Shattuck Hotel Plaza in Berkeley, California on Sunday the 10th of June 2018. The diverse speakers will give you tools to understand bad science and fake news, enlighten you about homelessness and artificial intelligence, protect your children from being hacked, and maybe even by being abducted by aliens. Information on the speakers and their topics can be found at the website skepticalcon.com. Skeptical work hard to make this a thought-provoking, timely subjects, top-notch, world-class speakers, low cost, under $50, one-day conference. Discount rates are available before the 15th of May. To grab those early tickets and for more information, visit skepticalcon.com or just look for the links in this week's show notes. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Now, coming up soon, we're going to be bringing you details about the upcoming Australian Skeptics Convention later on in the year in October. Hopefully, we can line up some interviews with some of the speakers coming up, and we'll tell you who's who and what's what and how to do it and where to get your tickets and all that sort of good stuff. Something to look forward to if you're in Sydney or Australia or anywhere. You can always jump on a plane, the Australian Skeptics National Convention, later on in the year. Of course, there are other conventions before that or around the same time or during the year, like we heard about Skeptical in California. There's the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, the SciCon coming up a bit later on, QED, all sorts of conventions. And before I go, another thank you, as I do periodically, to the supporters of the Skeptic Zone, those who subscribe via Patreon at skepticzone.tv or just through PayPal micropayments, whatever. Thank you very much. Your contributions not only mean the show keeps going, that I can also afford to buy things for reporters and help fund little trips and interviews and things like that. So no matter where you are or if you support the show financially or not, I hope you enjoy it, but give a thought to the people who do financially support the show, even if it's $5 a month via Patreon or something like that. It's thanks to those people and their generosity that everybody can enjoy, I hope enjoy, listening to The Skeptic Zone. Oh, and if you have time, why not have a look at the documentary James Randi in Australia? Again, it's a classic of skepticism. But for this week, until next week when I hope to bring you lots more information about the Australian Skeptics National Convention, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Happy birthday to Ada, the little girl who is featured on the Vaccination Chronicles, right at the beginning, playing in the park with her mum and her brother. Happy birthday to Ada, who's turning the big 6. 6. Oh, it's good to be 6 years old. Happy birthday from the Skeptic Zone and Henrietta and Maud, the Skeptic Zone cats.